The biggest thing about this game, and I'm going to kind of break it down I'm not going to go possession by possession stuff. And if I do that in the future for 10 straight minutes, maybe I'll put that a little bit later in the podcast. But it comes out where we know Zubats is going to be out. So then you're thinking, all right, they have nobody for Ayton, even though Ayton rebounding wise, like went crazy. I think 22 boards in game 4 as the Clippers, down 3-1 going out to Phoenix. So like everything prior to the game starting is you're feeling like it's Phoenix, right? You're feeling like, okay, Phoenix is going to close this thing out. They have no Zoo. They're going to have to go small the entire time. And guess what? They come out zone, they go small, and it's all working. Now, 15-4, I think that's what it was. I mean, it was 18-5. It was 20-5. Those kinds of scores are like, man, this is how the team's killing the other team. But it's just kind of the visual part of it where you see a team down that much and you the whole time you're like, are they going to make a run? But I think the startling part of it was, hey, zone should throw you off for a couple possessions, but it doesn't mean it should throw you off for like 6 minutes to start the game. And that's what it felt like. And it was 36-26 after the first quarter. But, something that happens with zones, you'll see teams kind of stop screening. Like it'll just happen. It shouldn't happen in the pros. It certainly shouldn't happen with Chris Paul. But there's an intensity level from the Clippers. Their secondary guys, because we're going to get to the Paul George story here shortly. But Beverly's going to get after you. Morris Sr., who I haven't always loved because I think he'll shove guys throughout games and then disappear a little bit late. He didn't miss a shot. I mean, he was carrying them offensively in the first half. He missed some shots in the second half, but that was kind of just balancing things out. Reggie Jackson's 3-point shooting. Like Reggie Jackson turned into one of the best ISO scorers that we've seen. Do you realize that he had 7 20-point games in the regular season? He's had now, I think, 9 or 10 in this playoffs alone where he scored 20 or more. Batum played 30 minutes and he doesn't take any shots, which actually is a good thing. Cousins comes in against the small lineup, so Cousins is able to score. He went 7-12 in 11 minutes because Phoenix, I think one of the biggest problems of the only thing you could really be critical of is how could you have not found another big to kind of back up Ayton in all these spots? So there's an intensity part of this that I thought was very clear that even when Phoenix finally took a lead in the second half, and I'll admit, like all of you probably watching at home, you're like, all right, Phoenix is going to run away with this thing, that the Clippers responded because the Clippers were tougher last night. And I think they've been the tougher team this season. And that's a huge problem for the Suns. Like looking at some of the numbers here for Phoenix, I mean, Jay Crowder, I can't even believe he made 2 shots in that game. He will have games in the playoffs, if you've watched him throughout his career, where it's just not going to happen for him. In other games where you like his size defensively and he's going to hit you a couple shots. Bridges only 5 points last night. Booker actually was 9-22 and 31 points and shot it well from 3 and made his free throws other than those 2 that he missed. But that actually surprised. I think that would surprise most people if you're sitting there being like, wait a minute, Booker had 31. I thought Chris Paul wasn't selfish enough, even though he couldn't hit a shot from 3. When they finally figured out what they wanted to do against the Clippers being small, there were moments where Paul could just get to that free throw line jumper whenever he wanted. But if Paul were to split him, hit the first, miss the second, miss the first, you could see that he was a little reluctant to go ahead and take that shot. And if that's the best shot in that moment, then go ahead and do it. I know nobody likes to run any post plays for anybody anymore, but DeAndre Ayton against a small lineup, only getting 9 shots isn't enough because he's not Gobert. He felt like Gobert last night in game 5, but he's not Gobert. He's not somebody who you can't, like, he can actually do a couple things with the basketball. I'm not saying you're going to run him off the block 20 straight possessions and post him up like Al Jefferson days here. And going even further back, Moses, like that's just not what the game is anymore. But to ignore it, to never make the Clippers pay for it, felt like a miss. But the toughness thing is something that kept coming back because the Clippers, let's face it, last year after blowing the 3-1 lead to Denver or watching those guys, even Kawhi, who, look, got a pass, I think deservedly so, compared to Paul George in game 7, and all these guys come up so short. You're like, how many foxhole guys do they have? Well, it feels like they have a lot, or it feels like they had a lot more than Phoenix did last night. But here's something I will always remind you, okay? This is Russillo Show, NBA Playoffs 101. You can never fake desperation. You're either desperate or you're not. And you can never be as desperate up 3-1, down 3-1, right? And if the teams are even, and I think we've learned, even though the Phoenix part of it, they've had their challenges. I mean, granted, they got the first 2, but Chris Paul has not been the same coming back with the COVID break. I don't know if it's because he's tired. I don't know if he's older. The same thing with the Clippers. They were tired, and then I guess they weren't tired in game 5, which is why I think the tired stuff, when we look at the results and whoever loses, we're just like, oh, well, look at their schedule. Look how tired they are. So doesn't that mean if the Clippers have played that many games in a row and they were tired in game 4, they should look tired again? Because they looked awesome in game 5. They did. They looked awesome offensively. And then Paul George, who in the first half, Jeff Van Gundy's kind of getting on, which I think he was doing accurately, 10 points in the first half, just sort of in a funk, lackadaisical with the basketball, waiting around, not matching the intensity of the other players around him. Then he goes for 20 points in the third quarter and basically carries the Clippers offensively because everybody else finally started missing shots. I mean, Paul George ended up with an unbelievable game here. Like, this is one of the all-time playoff games in Paul George's career, and it was a huge one. But what I don't like is when people will look at playoff series, and I'm repeating myself because I feel like it's one of those things that I say that I'm like, how come more people don't understand this? Because I know that it's right. It's if you win game 1 and then blow game 2, and then you win game 3 and you're up 2-1. I'm just talking about any series in general. And you're sitting there, you're like, yeah, we're up 2-0, but we should have been up 3-0 because, or we're up 2-1, we should have been up 3-0 because of what happened in game 2. You're like, you can't assume that game 3 plays out the same one as 1-1 as it would have if the other team was down 2-0. You can't do that. So if you're the Clippers saying, this series actually should be 3-2 us because of Paul George's missed free throws, maybe. I still think like there are examples where it could be true, where you could try to give the other side a game because of something how that played out. But all playoff games are connected. The results of the previous game impact the intensity and effort, and either somebody stepping up to face the pressure because they're pissed off and they know they have no other choice, or like other times with some of the Clippers that we even saw last year, you see a team that folds because of that pressure. Well, whatever the Clippers went through mentally, emotionally with that loss, because this is still pretty much the same group, this is a team that has responded in a big way. But as much as it scares me if I'm on the Sun side, because again, I just don't think Chris Paul was that good. I don't think he was consistent enough. We could talk minutes, you can talk being tired. I don't know, man. I mean, you're out there, right? You're out there. I just don't really get their offense sometimes. And that's the thing that I always thought, like, hey, Chris Paul, big spot, when you need a good possession, he's going to figure it out for you. I still believe that. I just don't think that really happened last night. I just don't. I think they going into game 4 too, which was just abysmal offensively for both sides. There's just too many stretches where I'm like, do you guys know kind of what the plan is right now? Or is there enough trust right now? Does this group have enough trust? The thing is 48 hours, it can change dramatically. Because now that the Clippers get one, and look, they're still going to have to be desperate because they're facing elimination here. Ty Lue has this insane record now, the best record ever facing elimination for 10 games or more. He's got the best record in NBA history. And again, a few weeks ago, people were wondering if he just was as bad as everybody else, and they're down at Dallas 2-0. But if you're on the Sun side of this thing, you have to remind yourself of, okay, well, look, as bad as it looked, Clippers look tougher. There's no way the Suns went into that game feeling as desperate as the Clippers did. So now maybe the Clippers or wake, maybe the Clippers even game 6, but it's just a different level when you're actually facing elimination as opposed to being up 3-1. And that's why, the Suns are really good, but still a work in progress here. The final part of this that I want to get to is the Paul George deal, the flowers. I'm out on this flowers terminology thing altogether. You probably could guess that I wasn't super into it anyway. I don't really get it. I think once SportsCenter tweets out something like, hey, make sure you give Madison Bumgarner all the flowers. Like, that's when I'm like, okay, maybe we should stop saying it now. Here's an exercise. All right, because Boogie Cousins went off. Rachel Nichols went off last night on Twitter about it, where it was kind of like, how come all of it, everybody's, all this hate? Like, Paul George wasn't that good in the first half, and then he was awesome. So why does this happen? Is it because a bunch of people just decided to be like, hey, I'm for no reason going to just start picking on Paul George all of a sudden? Like, of course, nobody would ever do that. But that's the way we act about it. So here's the exercise. Think about Ben Simmons right now. All right. What if in a year, Ben Simmons, either with Philadelphia or with a new team, we don't know, has a really great playoff game, 35, 10 and 10, makes enough free throws, maybe has a big transition dunk. Team wins by like 4 or 6 points, because I still can't picture Ben Simmons taking a step back jumper to win a playoff game. All right, so you're with me? It's 2022. We're in the first or second round of the playoffs. And whatever happens, Ben Simmons has a huge game. And then Ben Simmons' teammate takes the podium. He's like, man, I can't understand all this hate for Ben Simmons. And then somebody in the media is like, hey, got real quiet about the Ben Simmons hate out there. Give Ben Simmons his flowers. That would seem kind of weird right now, wouldn't it? Not that it happened. Not that the good game happened, because whenever we're critical of the top players, like that's the deal that they signed up for. If you're going to be considered a superstar, when you don't bring it superstar levels for multiple playoff games, then you're going to get criticized. I think the most inaccurate thing now that happens with superstars is why were people criticizing this star as if there was no evidence to ever criticize that guy? And that's why I bring up the Ben Simmons example as a reason here, because imagine a year from now, somebody being like, people are just, I don't understand where all this Ben Simmons hate comes from, which is exactly what Demarcus Cousins was doing. And you know what? Who cares? It's Cousins. It's his teammate. That's fine. But there's this very cyclical pattern of star is deemed star. Star has disappointing playoff series games. People question star level of deemed star. Star then later on has great games, reminds us why he was deemed star in first place, yet some others wonder why anyone ever questioned star status in the first place. And it just goes in one big fucking circle, and we all act like it's interesting.